upper left-hand corner. It can be anywhere. You're gonna do the same steps, so that's the kind of nice thing. It doesn't really change depending on your setup. So we could have something like this, 10 over x equals 1 over 7. Randomly made that up. But there's no change. So sometimes when things move around, it kind of changes what you're doing. Nope, same thing here. We're gonna cross multiply. 10 times 7 is 70. Equal in the middle, cross the other way, and that just gives me 1x. Okay, that was easy because I didn't actually have to do anything after that. Sometimes you might notice patterns to get from kind of one side to the other. That's fine, but using that method is always going to work. So can you guys try this one? I feel like I can't make these ones much harder. Let's do 2/5 equals 6 over x. Can you please solve for x?
Prospective people all over time about this paper and study here that I take other people, watch them and ask them every year how many questions you learned this year, and then see if you get among those
Okay, so let's look and see if you're okay with the basics, because then we're gonna add some stuff to it, obviously. We gotta make it a little fancier. So we are going to cross multiply, same idea. So I'm gonna cross this way, I get 2x. Equal in the middle, cross the other way, I get 30. And then you just do a quick solve. In this case, x is gonna be 15. Anyone have a problem with that? Okay, so that's the general stuff, if you kind of understand that. We're gonna add a little bit more, but it still always just goes back to that, so it's nice to just get it going. So here's another one, just a little more jazzy here. Let's do 5 over x plus 2, ooh, equals 7 over 11. Okay, so the difference is, instead of just having a variable, we can use anything, I tend to use x a lot. We call this an expression. So there is a variable, but it's attached to a number. So you can either add it, subtract it, whatever. So we still have to solve for x, and we're still gonna do the same exact steps. There's just one little thing you need to pay attention to, so I'll point it out. We're gonna cross multiply. 5 times 11 is 55. Okay, that wasn't bad. Equal in the middle, cross down. When you're doing 7, we're multiplying that entire thing. So anytime you see an expression, you always wanna put it in parentheses. That's the big thing, is the parentheses. So since we're multiplying 7 times that whole thing, we put the entire expression in parentheses. If you're just kind of doing this in your head and you write it as 7x plus 14, that's also fine. So I don't really care how you do it. But just make sure you're multiplying both. And then from there, the actual solving isn't too bad. You're gonna distribute it. You have now a 2-step equation. What's that gonna give me? 41. And then we're gonna divide. Getting a fraction is perfectly fine. You just leave it as an improper because I can't simplify that anymore. So the major thing I wanted to point out to you is if you do see an expression, aka there's more than one term, just make sure it goes in parentheses. Any questions there? All right, let's try one more and then we'll take a little break. This is about as fancy as it's gonna get. 2x plus 3 over 5 equals x minus 4 over 6. So with a proportion, this is about, once again, as complicated as it'll get. The nice thing is you always say, oh, fraction equals fraction. I'm gonna cross multiply, so that doesn't change. I'm just paying attention to those little details. So when I cross this way, I always put the number out in front. And then I'm multiplying it times an expression, so I'm gonna put that in parentheses. Equal in the middle, cross the other way. Once again, if there's just a number by itself, I put that out in front. And then since we're multiplying it by an expression, I'm gonna put that in parentheses. basically what's always gonna happen is you get an equation that should look familiar to us. So this is an equation with variables on both sides. We've been doing that since last week. So we just do our simplifying. 12x plus 18 equals 5x minus 20. You decide, we'll get your x's together. What does that give me? 7x plus 18 equals negative 20, subtract 18. 7x equals negative 38. I can't do anything to that, so I just leave it as negative 38 over 7. There we go. So I'm just kind of making these numbers up, so the answers aren't coming out nice. That is perfectly okay. Getting negative 38/7, why not? So we'll practice a little more, but that's about as complicated as it gets when you have two expressions. But the nice thing is, the steps are the same. When you see a fraction equal to a fraction, you cross multiply, and then it usually just gives you an equation that we should be semi-familiar with to solve. Does anyone have a question with that stuff? So we'll do a little bit more practice in a second, but at least we've been exposed. All right, so why don't we take these last few minutes? We will try those few problems just before we leave, just to make sure we're good. So I'll give you about 5 minutes and then I'll kind of interrupt you if you're not done yet, that's okay. But we will go over those. If you need help before then, feel free to ask, I can come help you. So we're gonna start to go over them in 2 minutes. If you have a question before then, feel free to yell it. Let's go over the, I'm so confused, that time is definitely not correct. Let's go over these quick, just to make sure we're good. Because you'll be seeing a few more proportions as we go. So when I cross, I get 25 equals 12C. I was mixing up my variables, I was feeling sassy today. Divide both sides by 12. C is gonna be 25 twelfths. You can just leave it like that, you don't need to do anything else if you're reducing. Number 2, cross multiply. We get 42 equals 10 times, in parentheses, D plus 5. Or if you distributed that out, that would be 10D plus 50. I'm gonna subtract to get, or try to start isolating that D. I'll get negative 8 equals 10D, and I'll divide by 10. I do get a fraction that is reducible, so please reduce it. Your final answer should be negative 4/5. Any questions so far with 1 or 2? So just little things with fractions, just be careful. 3, it's the same setup, we just have a little bit more simplifying. When we cross this way, we have 4 times 2e plus 1 equals, cross the other way, 3 times 5e minus 2. And I'm just going to do simplifying either side. Okay, let's get my e's together. What's that give me? 4 equals 7e minus 6. So 10 is going to equal 7e, so e is going to be 10/7. I'm just making these numbers up, that's why they're all randomly coming out of fractions. Sorry about that, but that's just life. And last but not least, we're solving for b. Don't try to start getting b by itself. Cross multiply this. You get AD equals CB, and now try to get this by itself, you would divide both sides by C. So it wasn't bad once you kind of saw what you were doing, but with the proportion, it's always best to kind of do that cross multiplication step first. Does anyone have a question with those other ones? Any general questions, anything you need to clear up before you leave today?